You know when you're roasting asparagus for dinner or a snack and you break it so that you only are roasting the tender part? Well, what do you do with all of these ends? You make creamy asparagus soup, and that's what we're gonna do today. Welcome to The Salted Pepper, where we cook for real life using real food and we keep it real simple. Today we're gonna make an extremely healthy and delicious cream of asparagus soup, and it is so easy to make. It's unbelievable. I'm gonna use the Ninja Foodi cold and hot blender, but you could do this on the stove or even in a pressure cooker. You just would need an immersion blender or to blend it up at the end and it would be fine. All right, so let me talk about the asparagus here because I'm gonna use whole asparagus just because I've already used up all of my ends in the test batches. But this soup, or all asparagus soup, is really meant to use up those ends that you don't use when you're roasting asparagus. So if you have a nice stalk of asparagus, down here towards the end is kind of tough. So what we do is we break it, and wherever it breaks, from there up is the part that you usually roast, and that's what you serve as an asparagus side dish, with dinner or just for a snack. So we have all these ends left. Well, you could turn them into a soup. You can use 8 ounces of these ends and make the same soup. I've done it before, it works fine. But because I had to buy a fresh batch of asparagus for this video, I'm gonna use both the good part and, the stems. What I would recommend is you keep out at least 4 to 6 if you're gonna use these stems, these pretty stems, because I use them as garnish, but I break them way up here. So I just break them just so we have that beautiful top there. And I'm gonna do that for about maybe 4 of them here. You need a total of 8 ounces of asparagus for the soup and then another 1 ounce of the tops for the garnish, okay? And that's totally optional. The soup tastes just as good without it, but if you're serving it for company, you wanna fancy it up, we are really gonna make this soup fancy and beautiful at the end. So if you wanna do that, keep these out. If you don't care, throw them all in. All right, so now we just start to add in our ingredients. The first thing I'm gonna do is get my water and my vegetable stock mixed up. So this is a vegetable base, and I'm keeping this dish vegetarian, so I'm not using chicken stock or any other kind of base. The vegetable base that I'm using is from Miners. I buy it on Amazon because it is the absolute best bases for soups and all kinds of dishes. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. So the flavor in here is superb. So I really recommend you going ahead and buying this if you want to make a lot of these kind of soups or vegetarian style dishes. And this keeps in the refrigerator for quite some time, but you can also put it into individual like little tablespoon portions and freeze it, and it will last a really long time. All right, so I have 1.5 teaspoons of the vegetable base mixed with 2 cups of water. Now, if you wanted to use a prepared vegetable stock or a chicken stock instead, it would work perfectly fine. But keep in mind, the seasonings that I'm using are based on this vegetable base. So you may need to increase some of your seasonings if you're using a less concentrated base of some sort or the prepared kind, prepared stock or broth. All right, so I'm just gonna mix this up. I like to do this before I put it in the blender so that the base doesn't sink to the bottom, because sometimes when we go under the heating function, it can actually kind of burn there on the bottom. So I like to try to get this mixed up best I can here. All right, that looks good. I still have a few little pieces there, but that shouldn't hurt anything. So we're gonna go ahead and put that into the Ninja Foodi cold and hot blender. Then we're gonna add in 8 ounces of cauliflower florets, and I just put them into, medium-sized pieces. You don't want them too big, they overtax the blender, but you don't need to chop them real small or anything like that. The cauliflower is what gives the creaminess because we don't use any milk. It's not dairy-free, but it could be dairy-free if you chose not to use the Parmesan cheese or a different type of cheese that is dairy-free. Okay. All right, now the asparagus. So I just break it up into about 2-inch pieces and plop it in. right. I have 2 ounces of hard Parmesan cheese. You could probably use the pre-shredded kind if you wanted to in this recipe, but I just have a block of it, so I just cube it up and then dump that into the blender. We want to have 1 teaspoon of fine grind sea salt. Now you don't have to add this in right now. If you're watching your salt intake, you want to salt at the end, you certainly can, or you can just omit the salt altogether. The base does have some salt in it, but it's not quite as salty as some other bases. So if you're using like a Better Than Bouillon chicken base or something like that, you might want to skip the salt until the end and then salt to taste. And then the most important part, and don't skip this, is a 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg. Oh, yum, 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 yum. All right, that's all that needs to go into the blender. So this is like super easy prep. Oh my goodness. Now we're going to pulse it. So we're gonna turn the Ninja Foodi blender on and I'm gonna pulse a few times. It doesn't have to get super smooth, but I like to pulse it so that everything's in smaller pieces. It just makes it easier when it's cooking. Everything's gonna cook really well and be nice and smooth and velvety at the end. All right, and then you just hit smooth soup and that is it. So that's all you have to do. 30 minutes, we're gonna have our creamy asparagus soup and wait until you see what I put on top of mine. All done, and oh my gosh, does it smell good in here. But this is piping hot, so I usually just let it sit for a few minutes while I get my garnishes together. Now, I've already roasted my asparagus, so what I did to roast this is I just tossed in a little bit of olive oil, sprinkled it with a tiny bit of salt, and I put it under the broiler in the XL oven, which is right back there, for about 3 minutes, and it was done. So that's perfect. Then I have some of my other garnishments, and I'm just getting that surprise topping finished up back there on the stove. An egg. And this is just a sunny side up egg. Now, my pan was a little hot, so I've got some bubbles here. If you control the temperature a little bit better, you'll have a beautiful white part. So I just want one sunny side up egg. We're gonna trim it up. Now, if you don't like sunny side up eggs, that's fine. You could do over easy, you could fry it, but really it's the yolk that makes this topping for our soup so spectacular. It adds a richness and a creaminess because we didn't put any cream in there, you know? So this really made the soup spectacular, but it's still good just like it is, I promise. All right, so let me go ahead and just peel this off. So I just used a biscuit cutter so I can have a perfectly round egg. All right, so I'm taking about 1 cup of the soup out and carefully pouring it in there. It's just gorgeous. It's velvety. It smells amazing. But, you know, it looks like a bowl of green soup. So we need to fix that a little bit. We need to jazz it up. And I do that with a basil leaf. Now, usually my basil leaves, I grow them outside and they're a lot smaller. So I just put a couple there, but Jeff got me some and they're pretty big and that's okay. So I just set that right there. And then I take my egg and I put the egg right on top. Please slide off, right? Please slide off. Put that right there. And then I put 1 or 2 asparagus. You can put it wherever you want. I'm not a food decorator really, but you can put it wherever you want. I think it actually looks pretty good right there. All right, there we go. Oh, last thing, just a sprinkle of red pepper flakes. Now that is my personal preference. You could use some cracked black pepper if you prefer, but I just love the way that it looks and I love the way that it tastes. All right, so speaking of taste, let's go ahead and dig in here. All right, let me just get some of the soup. Oh my gosh. I cannot get over the flavor in this soup. I just cannot. It is amazing. The first time I made it, I was using some, leftover asparagus, and I did not have high hopes for it at all. And it's so creamy. It's so delicious. Like, cauliflower is magical in my opinion. Perfect. All right, so now let's get that egg. Now the egg yolk should definitely be runny. You want that to get into your soup. And I'll take off some of the egg. Oh my gosh. And I'm gonna cut a little bit of the basil off because I don't want to eat that big old chunk of basil. Make sure if you're serving this for guests too that you definitely add the basil at the very end, because the heat from the soup will make it turn brown and it won't look very pretty. You could also chiffonade it if you want. I'm just gonna go ahead and cut all this up, including that asparagus. You could put a couple pieces of asparagus on there if you wanted. And now our creamy soup has a little bit of texture and a whole lot of richness. Oh, and you know what I forgot? You can't forget the Parmesan cheese. Just a tiny little bit over the top, and that finishes it off perfectly. This is an extremely healthy dish that is fancy, or keep it simple and don't add any of these toppings. Oh my gosh. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. The basil's perfect. I'm trying to find a piece of that asparagus that I cut up, and now I can't find it. There it goes. The egg is perfect. The soup is unbelievable. This is absolutely amazing. If I got this in a restaurant, I would be thrilled. So definitely give this one a try. It's super easy to make, super delicious, and it can be super fancy if you want.